What's up, guys? In today's video I want to walk you through how to set up redux-form. So if you've tried to set up redux-form and you came to issues and you couldn't get it working, this video is for you. I'm just going to walk you guys through this implementation guide right here so you can get your first form up and running. So the first thing I'm going to do is just do yarn add redux-form to install the library. And if you don't know what yarn is, it's very similar to npm, but I think it's a little bit faster. If you don't have yarn and you want to try using it, you can do npm install -g and then do yarn, or it could be yarn CLI. If you can Google it and it'll tell you it's probably yarn. And if you don't want to use that, you just want to use npm, you can also do npm install and do redux-form. But cool, that's installed. So the first step it tells us to do is to add this to our reducer. So I basically have just a basic React project here. If you have a React project you're working on, go ahead and use that. If not, I have a GitHub below that I'm going to link that you can clone and use that to follow along if you want to. Okay, so I'm just going to open this up and I'm going to go into my root reducer. And I'm just going to go ahead and add this line right here. So we're going to import that, and let's see if we can move this over a little bit. There we go. And we can close that for now. Okay, so we add this, we're importing the reducer, and then we just need to add this to our reducers. So it's, oops. I'm going to move this to a new line, and then I'm just going to put form is equal to form reducer, just like they have it there. And now I'm already setting up this stuff because I already have Redux set up in this project. If you do not have Redux set up in your project, you need to make sure and do that first. So let's move on to the next step, was to actually create our form. So I'm going to go into the components folder and I'm just going to create a new form called my form, and we're going to import React from React. Now there's two choices when you're basically creating forms. We're just going to mimic this contact form, and actually we can just copy this exact thing . So you can just copy this exact code actually right here and it should work for you. But what I was going to say is you can actually create a class like this, or if you don't need basically these functions, like if you're not going to use constructor or component will mount in your form, what you can do is actually make this into just a function, which I'm going to show you next after we get this to render on the screen. So I just want to walk through this code real quick so you guys understand what's going on. So we're creating a form handle submit. This is something that redux-form passes to us, and we need to grab it from the props. And it's not even, I'm just going to do this .props.handle submit, because we're not using it anywhere else. So this is basically, this is the function that's going to be called when we're done, when we submit the form. And this is something that actually redux-form gives us, and we can actually create another function here that's called mySubmit. And here we can just do values. And then if we call that this.mySubmit, what will happen is when we submit the form, it'll actually pass the values into our form right here. But for now, we're not going to do that. We just want to see a form render on the screen. So we're just going to have it like that. Okay, so then he has a field component. Right now he's doing a very basic field component where he's just doing an input field. So he's basically, what's happening here is you can think of it like an input, and he's just wrapping it around with this field. That way redux-form knows about it. And this name is very important. First name, this is the name that is going to be returned when, this is how you're going to access this field, by this name, first name. So for example, if you want to get the value of this field, you would reference it by first name. And so he's just creating a couple more fields the same way. He's doing different names for them. And notice he's using the component input for all of them. But you can actually change this to a custom input, which we'll actually be doing in a little bit. Okay, so we have this submit button. That's just normal to submit the form. And then this part down here is very important. You basically just need to react your, or not react, you need to wrap your component with this redux-form function. And then you just pass in basically a name. As it says, you want to do a unique name for every form you create. So this, we're going to call it contact. And this is to reference your form if you need to outside of this. But we won't really need to be doing that. So it's fine. So we are then just exporting it so we can import this in our project. So now in my home component, I'm just going to import my form so we can see what it looks like. And then we're almost done. You still need to do something, it says. And this is just the on submit. So we can do this as well. So there's like two ways to do it. You can put the on submit outside your form or inside your form. This is what I would say, doing it outside your form. So we can do this first. So we can call this submit. Do console.log values. And then we can say on submit is equal to this.submit. Now notice how the on submit prop here, if we go back to our form, the prop we were using was handle submit. So that's not the actual prop that, we're not passing that to on submit here. Notice how on submit here is getting handle submit, and then we're passing in on submit to our actual form. This is the correct way to do it. It looks weird, but what's happening is handle submit is something that redux-form uses, so you need to have that in your form. This is something redux-form uses to actually update the redux state and know that you're done submitting the form. And then if you actually want the values of the form, you have to pass in an on submit prop. Okay, so let's go over to our React application, and submit is not defined in home.js, and that's because I put it inside the render function. So you refresh that, okay, and we have this nice little form. And if I bring up the console, looks like we have a problem. And this looks like it's just a different part of the project, uncaught at the root. So this is just a different part of the project. It's not an error coming from the that I have one of my sagas messed up. Okay, so I'm just gonna say Bob, and my last name is gonna be Bob2, and my email is gonna be bob@bob.com. Then when I submit this, as you can see, it'll return the object back, and then we can do whatever we want with this form data. And notice how we're console logging the values here. Alright, cool, so that works. The next thing I want to show you is, so we got a basic form working, right? It'll render on the screen okay. And I kind of just want to show you different ways to get this working. So for example, what if I don't want my submit here? What if I want to have the same submit no matter what my form is, or who calls my form? So what I can do is do a submit function here. console.log submit inside form, and we can just log the values, and then we can do anything we want with those, and then we just have to call the function this dot submit. This dot submit, passing in our submit here to our handle submit function that redux form gives us. So now I can do this again, A, B, C, and we can see we get submit inside form, and we can get the values back. Very cool. So now I also told you that you don't really need to make this into a class if you don't need to. Like right now, this is for this form is so simple you don't need a class. If your class doesn't need some of the class methods, then you don't need one. What I can do is I can get rid of this. I can get rid of render. I can get rid of that. Get rid of all this stuff. And I can basically just have a function here that's going to be called contact form is equal to. So I'm creating a function called contact form, and all it's going to do is it's going to return this stuff. And now we can copy that over, and then props are passed here. So we basically, instead of saying this, we have to get the props from here. So I can get handle submit that way, and then we actually just have access to this submit here. And contact form is equal to contact form. We basically want to just change the name. We'll call this contact form function, I guess. Okay, and contact form is not defined. Let's see what it doesn't like. So component is never used, submit is not defined. Just need to say const there. And contact form is not defined. We just say const. Okay, so notice how that renders. And let's just give it another test. And you can notice it worked just like it did before. So this is a lot simpler. It's lighter weight because it's just a function instead of a component. So whenever your form doesn't need to be a class, I recommend building it like this because it just makes the logic a lot simpler, and it can work a lot better this way. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is, let's say this component's really ugly, right? No one's going to want to make a form that looks like this. What if I want something different? What if I want a custom input type? Or maybe, let's say I want a password or something. Well, I guess you can get password working, but let's say we want something from a library to style it. They actually support custom fields. So if we just click on fields here, it'll show us how we can do custom fields. Is it here? Here we go. So I can actually create a function called render field. Okay, and what I can actually do is tab that over, give it a semicolon. Okay, so you notice they basically styled it a little bit differently. And notice how there's this field object that they're going to call. So how we're going to do this is we're then, instead of doing it this way, instead of doing input, what we're going to do is we're going to just pass in render field. And what's going to be, it's going to pass in us a field object with a lot of information. Now what I like to do is actually decompose this, and that way you don't have to basically do field dot a bunch of times. So like input is something we're going to need here. Looks like we're going to need meta we're going to need touched and air, so I can do meta and do touched and air. And then what I can do is then I could just expand input, and then I can do if it's touched and there's an error, then we can show the error. Okay, so I just want to walk you through what these props are. So the input field here is every time the user basically types a letter into the input, it is going to dispatch an action and update the Redux state. But you don't have to worry about that. But you just need to do ... input. That way that you're basically connecting this input element with a Redux form or a Redux store, so it can actually pass information between them. And then down here, this is basically a condition. It's saying if they've touched the input and there's an error, then you show the error with the span element. So this is something that Redux form takes care for you. It looks for if they've touched the input and if there's an error, then it will go ahead and return this to you that there is an error, it is touched, and so you can show the error. And then that's pretty much it for this render field. And now what I also like to do is, let's say we want a label, and I just want to have like a label, just a label function basically. So I can replace all of these forms with basically one thing. So now I can actually pass this as a prop, and I can grab it in. So now instead of that, I can say pass in the component, and I can say label, and I can say first name, and now I can delete this, I can delete this, and I can delete this. So we just have this field here, and I can do the same thing for all three of these. So now I can say label is equal to last name. You can delete the outer divs because you know it's going to give us a div automatically because we're going to be calling that component. So we're going to render field there, and we can do that for email as well. So now that's how we simplify this a lot. Now we just have our little custom component here, and we call that 3 different times. So now if we come back over here, you can see it rendered okay, and it looks the exact same, but we simplified our code a lot. And also, you can now style this in any way you want. Let's say I want a line break here for whatever reason, and it splits these two on 2 different lines. Like you can style them a lot faster now and make them all the same if you want to. And I can create as many of these render field functions. I could say a render field 2 and then change it slightly differently. And notice how the type is text here. What we can actually do is notice how we're putting the type here. We can get this prop here as well. That way they're not all text. Oops. And that'll pass the type in. So that's how you do a custom little input function that Redux form can use. Now that is the basics of Redux form. Now there's one last thing I want to go over, which is validation. So if we just come down to, we're going to start with regular validation, which I believe is just submit validation. And I want to do, yeah, let's do this one. This one's fine. Or actually, I want to see if there's field level validation. That might be the one I was looking for. So basically, this validation is you're breaking it out by fields. I don't like doing this validation as much. I prefer the onSubmit. So let's do the submit validation. So the submit validation has you basically coming in this onSubmit, and if there's something you don't like, you basically throw an error. So I'm gonna do another import here for a Redux form called submission error. Submission error. And I'm gonna decompose this values. We should be getting a first name, last name, and email. See, this is what I was talking about with the name. The name that you use here is going to be passed up here. So first name, last name, and we can scoot this over because we don't need that anymore. And also email. So now I can do any type of validation that I want. I can say, for example, so maybe I want to make sure that first name, last name, and email are not blank. That's a very common check to make sure before you basically submit the form and do something with it. So if first name dot, I think it's trim, and basically you're checking, then you have an error. And I don't know if it's throw, I don't think it's throw inside of the submit, but I kind of want to check to see. Submission error. Actually, yeah, it is, but how I want to do it. Here's another way that I have done it before that I really like. Is to basically create an error object, an empty error object. And I do let is error is equal to false. And at the very end I'll do if is error, I'll throw new submission error, and I'll pass in my error object, else submit form to server, or do something else with it. And then I'll do all my checks here. So if, for example, first name is not empty, or if first name is empty, then what we want to do, so is it, do we put a not here? So if we want if is equal to basically empty, or undefined, or any of that. Oh, and also what I like to do is I like to just set a default of an empty for each one of these in case it comes in undefined. So we'll do it like this. If first name, if we trim the first name and it's equal to an empty string, then we say error.firstname is equal to required. And then we say is error is equal to true. And this is important that I used first name, because now what's going to happen is as soon as we throw this error, it's going to associate first name to the field first name. It's going to pass in required to this error field right here. And I'm actually going to do this 3 more times. I'm going to do this for last name, and I'm going to do this for email as well. So now if we come over to our form, if I just click submit, you'll notice how it says all 3 of these say required. But if, for example, I add a letter, now only 2 of them say required. And you need that as well. Just an @ sign. So now just last name is required. So that is pretty cool, right? We are connecting the error by, we're telling them which error is by the submission form. And if we just do that, it should submit okay, and it does. We'll say, let's console log to show that it gets to this. Console log valid submission. So it says required, and we get a valid submission. Okay, very cool. So, and you can do any type of error checking here, any type of validation you want when they submit it. So for example, what if I want like the first name needs to be, I don't want them to basically put in like 100 characters. So I could say if first name dot length is greater than let's say we just want less than 20, then we could throw a new error that says first name too long, and then they have to fix that. So as you can see, you can add any type of validation here that you want. Now that's it for this video, but in the next video what I want to show you guys how to do is to actually submit this form to a server. So let's say I successfully submitted my first, last name, and email, and now I have a backend server that I want to talk to, and I want to submit this data to, and so it can add it to the database. So that's what I'll be showing you in the next video. If you're interested in checking out that, please stay tuned, and I'll put a link in the description below when that video is done, so you guys can check that out and learn how to submit your forms to servers. So I hope this helped. If you have any more questions on redux form, you can leave a comment below and I'll be happy to help. And I'll see you guys in the next video.